So I have mentioned before in past sermons about I worked in this corporate America job where I was under the microscope a lot by my coworkers. They knew I was a Christian. They were constantly testing me. And there was this one time where our boss, or my boss at the time, he was having this like team building exercise, and then we were all gonna go to Dave & Buster's that night after work one time. And so the company had decided to give all of the employees a couple drink tickets for dinner. Now, I didn't have a problem with that the corporation was giving us drink tickets and that people were gonna be drinking responsibly at the dinner, but I thought for myself, if I am completely under the microscope, I think the better thing for my testimony to do would be to not drink and to give my drink tickets away. Well, that caused quite a frenzy. And my coworkers, I only told a couple of them I was gonna maybe do it, and they were sharking, blood in the water with a shark. And this dude comes up and he's like, "Hey, you gonna use your drink ticket?" And I kind of had some fun with it, and I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Oh, no reason. I was wondering. It doesn't matter. It's fine. No big deal." And he walked off. So I end up giving the tickets to a couple other responsible people, and we have the dinner, and then the company actually gave us some tokens to go play some games afterwards. Well, the guy who originally asked for the drink ticket, I didn't give him one of the tickets. He walks up to me and he's like, "Hey, thanks for the drink ticket." And I was like, okay. So I was just whatever. So we keep going. Later on, he finds me and he goes, "Hey, again, thanks for that drink ticket." So I was like, I just ignored him, whatever. Again, he comes by and he says, "Bro, again, thanks for that drink ticket." I said, "Whatever." So we go back around and he comes back around again. And I'm starting to get real irritated at this point. He gets up in my face and he says, "Hey, bro, thanks again for the drink ticket." And I had gotten pushed to a limit that was not healthy. I had a moment of weakness, I'm not gonna lie. And I just fired back and I said, "Oh, thanks again for being an idiot." And he goes, "What?" He goes, "What do you mean? Didn't you give me a drink ticket?" And I was like, "No." He goes, "I thought you gave me a drink ticket. I've been trying to say thank you all night and you've been ignoring me." I was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." He's like, "What is the matter with you?" I was like, "I'm sorry. I thought that, okay, I'm so sorry." And so needless to say, it was not helping my testimony as that I had hoped, I was super embarrassed by that. It was all fine, but I didn't see all of the variables inside of this moment. I just assumed them. And I just reacted based upon what I thought I knew to be true, and it backfired on me. And so sometimes we have to be patient. We have to recognize that there is something else going on, that we don't see the whole picture. And that can happen to us spiritually as well, because Jesus may not give us all of the variables inside of something, or not yet. Or what we will do is we will tell Jesus or we thought how something should happen. So we reacted. We tried to force Jesus's hand, or we just say, "Oh, here's what I want, and I'm asking you to bless it, Jesus." And it backfired on us. And so we have blind spots in all of our faith. We have blind spots, we have things that we cannot see. We have a sort of spiritual blindness in just about every level of our faith. And so that's what we're gonna be talking about inside of the text today, is answering this question: how does Jesus give sight to our spiritual blindness? So we're gonna end chapter 8 of Mark. We're in the book of Mark, and we're starting verse 22, which says, "When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Then, spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, 'Can you see anything now?' The man looked around. Yes, he said, 'I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around.' Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were open. His sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him away, saying, 'Don't go back into the village on your way home.'" Oops, back one. So number one, we're gonna see how does Jesus give sight to our spiritual blindness? Number one is through gradual sight. So here we have Jesus just hawking loogies on people again. If you remember, we talked about he spit on his finger and he put it in the guy's mouth, and he unlocked. You guys really like that sound? I don't know why. It's fine. I'm happy to do it. And he unlocked the guy's tongue. But like Jesus now has just bypassed finger altogether. And he's just like, can you see now? Like, what do you see now? Like, it's just kind of jarring, right? And he just goes right for this guy's eyes. And we don't really know the exact reason why Jesus used spit here. Now, in a previous message, I talked about some theories as to why Jesus used spit, but we don't know exactly, and especially in this one. But some people wonder that Jesus, in this instant, used spit because this man's blindness was so severe. He had all this gunk in his eyes, and he was using the spit to clear it out. Okay, I thought some of you would like that. Anyways, but this is a really interesting story because this story has baffled scholars for years. They don't completely understand what is the point of this specific story. Like, I did a lot of reading on this section, and all of the commentaries and the literature that I read about this, that I kept seeing this one word coming up over and over again, and it was the word gradual. All of them said gradual because Jesus gave this man gradual sight. But you start thinking like, but why gradual, Jesus? Like, why didn't you just heal him the first time? Like, you can, but he didn't. And that's why people are baffled by this. Like, why did he need 2 different times of healing? Why did he touch him twice? But you see, the healing of this man, it served a couple different purposes. One was, well, the guy needed to see, and that's a pretty obvious one. It was to heal the man. But this was actually foreshadowing, it was a lesson for the disciples in their blindness. And they were unable to perceive Jesus as the Messiah. Like, if you remember last week, we talked about how the disciples were so hard-hearted, and he's like, don't you understand? Do you still not get it after this miracle? And so they were, so Jesus was giving them, like, they didn't perceive him as the Messiah yet. And Jesus would like give them this gradual sight as well. And because Jesus to the disciples, he was special, he was a special dude, but he wasn't the Messiah yet. And so he was likely, like basically Jesus to the disciples in this moment was like the man being healed, and everything was blurry, and it was like people were walking around like trees, looking like trees. And so this man's blindness was so severe that Jesus took time to gradually heal this man, just as the disciples, their blindness needed time to gradually heal, to gradually see the whole picture. So we can see some parallels to us in this manner, like in this section in our spiritual life too, because we can realize we're sick, we're blind, we need help, we truly want help, we don't know where that is, and maybe we're like this man's friends. It says they brought him to Jesus, they pleaded with him. And then maybe we came to Jesus and we say, I'm open to it. Like, I don't know if I believe in you, but I'm open to it. And then Jesus, he takes us aside. You know, it says it took this man aside privately. And you know, we're not completely sure, like, if we believe, but we're open to it. And Jesus pulls us aside and he just hawks a big loogie in our eyes, or that's not really quite like that, but he pulls us aside privately and he lets us see a little bit, just a little glimpse. And if you're a new believer, it's like it's blurry, but like it's a little overwhelming. It's maybe exciting, but you like, okay, I don't know what I'm seeing, but it's different. It's different. I can see something. And so, yes, we may be excited and maybe we want to learn more about Jesus and maybe like we just see part of the picture. But you know, like all of us, we're like, why do I only get part of it? Like, I want to see all of it. Like, and who wouldn't? All of us are like, I want to see the whole thing. Don't withhold anything from me. We're like cats. Anyways, and so like, I think, but what really is interesting in this is that he pulls us aside and he does all these things, but Jesus doesn't always work like that to show us everything. Like, if you've been a believer for a long time, you realize Jesus doesn't give you the whole picture. Like, sometimes he does, but it's pretty rare. And sometimes he just gives us a little glimpse of his glory. And we see these blurry trees. And he causes us to be patient. And he causes us to trust him, to see the picture is just a little clearer. And we need to trust him when we can't fully see everything. But yet we have this like private little moment with him. And it's just like we're sitting there waiting for like, when's the next treatment come? Like, Lord, when are you gonna like, let me see more? And see, what's interesting is we all know this is everybody advances differently at different rates in our faith, right? Like some people, it just takes one treatment, and then suddenly, you're cured. You understand Jesus' will for your life. You easily give up addictions. People just easily just give up sins. They just turn around. They're just it, and there they go. And it's awesome. It's just that simple for them. But there are others of us that it takes a couple times, right? Because we might have a more severe blindness that causes us to have a second treatment, or we see partially, but it's going to take a little bit longer to truly see who Jesus is, just like this man. And so for us, the equivalent is, yes, he may be God to us. I see a little bit, but he's not yet the Messiah of my life. And so Jesus, he heals blindness for us in a gradual sense to start. And then as you get older, as you are growing in your faith, you have some experience under your belt. I think you can agree, and we even talked about it in our pre-service prayer. We talked about that if Jesus gave me the full vision of what I know now at the infancy of my faith, oh my gosh, I would just be overwhelmed, overstimulated, it is too much to take in. And it's like drinking from a fire hose, right? And so you look back and you think, man, I'm so thankful he didn't make me drink from a fire hose. Just one touch from Jesus in the infancy of my faith is a lot to take in. So Jesus often, he will later just be you start to thank him for how gentle and kind and patient he was with you, and gradually letting you see who he is at a rate in which you can understand. And so in the same way, the disciples, Jesus knew the disciples' hearts were hardened, like we talked about last week. He knew the miracles weren't very flashy. They were starting to get very flashy for the disciples. They weren't flashy enough. And Jesus was getting a little frustrated with them, don't you understand? But still, he was patient with them. And still, he was gracious with them. And he knew they needed more than one treatment. And he was patient, and he's gracious with us too. When you don't completely get it right away, when you can't completely see the whole picture. And so Jesus had to heal this man once, but he chose, he could have healed this man once, but he chose not to. Because Jesus always does something for a reason. He has a purpose inside of this. So this story is about the gradual, gracious, patient healing of Jesus for the disciples to come see him as the Messiah. And he used this man's severe blindness as a teachable moment for the disciples and a teachable moment for the readers. That's us. So this is a moment where we can stop and give thanks to Jesus, give him praise for pulling us aside in our blindness, in our hard-heartedness, in our doubts, in our fears, in our pettiness, and letting him just get that spiritual gunk out of our eyes to start. And he gives us a moment to process. He's patient with us, and he lets us get a glimpse of his power first, and then he opens up our eyes completely to become the Messiah of our life. He's no longer just the God of the Christians. He's no longer the Sunday school felt board character that we put up. He's no longer the dude that we just kind of talk about, seems like a nice guy on Sundays that we hear. No, when he completely starts to wipe it away, he becomes our King. He becomes our God. He becomes our Messiah. He becomes our Savior. And then the final lesson I think we can see for this man with the blindness that I think is potentially overlooked is we need to be reminded, don't go back to the village. He says, don't go back through the village. Now, some people believe that's because Jesus' ministry was not yet supposed to start, and it's possible. But a lot of the scholars believe that this was because the people he would have gone back to would not receive Jesus' ministry. They were not going to believe that he was healed. They were not good for him, and he was not going to preach his gospel there any longer. And so for us, it is a reminder that once our eyes are open, don't go back to the village. Don't go back to the toxic cycles of people, of bad habits, of cultures, of sin that are not open to the ministry of Jesus. In fact, there is a bunch of hard-hearted people waiting to pull you back into the darkness, to pull you back into the blindness, to pull you back into the sins that you have that are your vices. And there are times to go and tell others and evangelize to people about Jesus. And there are times to start over with a new life with Jesus, with a new life with people who love Jesus, and then to evangelize to other people when they are ready. But there are times to avoid your past villages. And there is a time where you can evangelize to people who want their eyes opened just like you did at one point. So Jesus starts this progression by giving this a gradual sight. And then he moves us into the next stage. So let's look at the next section of scripture. Verse 27 says, Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you're one of the other prophets." Then he asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Peter replied, "You're the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later, he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, then reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." And Jesus calls Jesus calls Peter Satan. Like that's pretty intense, right? Like other translations maybe are used to hearing, "Get behind me, Satan." Speaking of which, one of my favorite jokes about that phrase, "Get behind me, Satan," it's a story of this pastor who he looks on his credit card bill and he sees that there is a charge for a dress for $500. So he goes home and says, "Honey, did you buy a dress for $500? Like, you know that we can't afford this." And she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I was walking by the department store and I saw it in the window, and like Satan kind of whispered behind me. He said, 'You would look fabulous in that.' Yeah, well, the next thing you know, I'm inside and I'm trying it on. And as I'm trying it on, Satan said, 'You do look fabulous in that.' And her husband said, 'Honey, did you do what I told you to do? Did you say the words? Did you say, 'Get behind me, Satan'?" She said, I did say that." He said, "Well, what did he say?" He said, "You look fabulous from back here too." So of course I bought it. That's one of the rare times I get to actually tell that joke. So thank you for letting me tell that. Okay, how does Jesus give sight to our spiritual blindness? Number 2, through second sight. Now, I don't mean second sight like psychics who believe that they somehow have second sight. I mean, just like the blind man whose vision was blurry to start and then it was clearer later, so the same thing would happen to Peter and to the disciples here. They were eventually given a second, clearer sight. So Jesus, he's walking along and he says, "Hey guys," essentially says, "Who do people, what does the world, who does the world say that I am?" And they're like, "Oh, John the Baptist, Elijah, you're like a prophet." They're kind of like, you're like a good teacher, you're a prophet. It kind of reminds me of if today, if you went out into public and you just said, "Excuse me, who do you think Jesus is? Who do you say Jesus is?" And you'd get probably some of these answers, like a wide array of he's probably a good teacher. I think he's that guy that the Christians like. He's a prophet. My religion says he's a prophet. He's a good moral teacher. I don't know if I agree with everything that he teaches on, but I think it's generally positive. He may not be God. I'm not really sure. Now, Jesus, he seemed to be satisfied with this answer. He's like, "All right, fine with me. I'm fine if that's what they want to believe." Because then he moves on to more importantly, he says to his followers, "But who do you say I am?" And it's really interesting is that's a really good question to ask each other. Who do you say, who is Jesus to you? And you would be amazed at some of the conversations that I've had with people just saying, "Who is Jesus to you?" And people are like, or some people have said, "I have never been asked that. In my whole Christian life, since being a Christian, nobody's ever asked me who Jesus is to me." And it can be kind of baffling, but it can lead to some awesome discussions about who Jesus is to you. You're saying, who is Jesus to you? Who do you say Jesus is? Not who does your pastor say that he is? Not who does your upbringing say that he is? Not who does your spouse say he is? Because one day Jesus, at the end, Jesus may say to us, who am I to you? And you can't say, hang on, my pastor's probably around here somewhere. He can probably tell you who you are to me. My wife's around here somewhere. She probably could tell you who you are. I don't think we want to be okay with that as our answer. And so this can be a very difficult question for people to answer. It is kind of like their first sight. For some of us, once you are able to answer that first sight of who Jesus is, like who is he to you? And Peter has a first sight and he answers with, well, he's kind of like, oh, you're the Messiah, aren't you? That's how I picture it. It's like, oh, I got it. You're the Messiah. Like it took him a while. Like Peter's all excited because that's how Peter is. And it's true. And it's a good answer. But his eyes are open, but they are only equivalently open like the blind man who could only see people and they look like trees walking around. He didn't have the whole picture to what was going on. Like Peter is correct, but he doesn't see everything. But it doesn't seem like he doesn't see everything, right? On the surface, like Jesus is the Christ. He's the Son of the living God. Like that is correct information. Like we have maybe even said that as our confession. Maybe somebody has taken that confession from us right before we got baptized. But it's not the whole picture. And so Peter, we see here, needs another treatment, another touch of healing, just like the blind man, to understand who Jesus is, a second sight, a clearer picture, because Jesus corrects Peter. Now, if Peter had the whole picture, he wouldn't have to be corrected, right? And I think an easier way, because it ramps up really quick, like get behind me, Satan. But I think if we could summarize this in a little gentler way before getting to that extreme, I feel like it would be like Jesus saying to Peter, yes, Peter, I am the Messiah. But what does that mean for your life? And I think Peter would have gone, what do you mean? Because Jesus, he gives them a clearer picture. You're seeing trees. You're seeing people that look like trees walking around. Yes, I'm the Messiah, but I am so much more than just the Messiah. He's looking at them saying, men, pay attention to me, listen to me. I am the Messiah, but I have to go and be rejected. I have to go and suffer and die, but I will rise again 3 days later from the grave. And you have to understand how incredibly weird that was for them to hear that. We've heard this story for a while. It doesn't seem weird to us, but David Guzik said, this is the equivalent if an American president candidate elect at the end of his campaign says, I have to go to Washington. And I have to be rejected, and I will be killed, and I will do it willingly. And that's kind of unheard of. Why would you go and do that as a president? No president goes into office knowing you're going to die and willingly do it. So in the same way, it was unthinkable that a Messiah would go and be killed and suffer willingly. So Jesus, he's teaching them, no. You don't understand what a Messiah is. I am the Messiah. And here's what I was sent to do. Here is your second sight. Here is a clearer picture, an extra touch so that you can see a little better because you're spiritually blind. I'm being patient with you. He pulls back the curtain for them. Like it's a lot to take in. Like he's like, okay, here's what it's all about. You guys ready? Here's what I got to go do. And I think that the disciples were kind of like, just probably thinking like, okay. Oh, sure, Jesus. Like, did he drink some salt water? Like, does he know he's the Messiah, right? Like, hey, you need to lie down, bro. Like to them, this is like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And that's why it made no sense to Peter. Because Peter, like you see in Jewish culture, and the tradition said that the Messiah would come, but he would come in a strong military presence. He would come with strong presence and force to destroy Rome and to destroy the enemies of Israel. And so Peter, Peter essentially is like, hang on, Jesus. That's not what Messiahs do. No, you don't suffer, you conquer. I don't think you understand that. So then Peter has the brilliant idea of heavy-handedly coming over and blessing Jesus with his opinion. and like, can I see you for a second, Jesus? Okay, good thing I'm here. This is what a Messiah truly is. Bless his heart, Peter. Like, what are you doing, bro? But we are just as bad with each other. Like, some of us can be so heavy-handed in our opinions to each other, right? It's like, oh, good thing I'm here. Here's what you got to do. You just got to do this, and you got to do this, and you'll be fine. I'm just going to mama or papa bear you into submission. Or we're just blessing people with our opinions, saying like, oh, good thing I'm here. Here is the history and the background on messiahs. Good thing I'm here, so I'm going to tell you what is correct. And we think that we're being very loving, but we actually, between each other, we start to put up these walls of division with each other because we start to be very heavy-handed and like, oh, no, here's just what you got to do. And you watch Peter going up to Jesus is like, oh, good thing I'm here, Jesus. Here's what you got to do. Because we together inside of our situations between each other, we cannot see the whole picture. It's like we are like I was the blind guy. I was blind when that guy was saying thank you to the drink tickets. And instead of me understanding the whole picture, I just put him on blast. And I thought, that's a good idea. And it was a terrible idea. Because we assume we knew the context. We assume we knew what Messiah meant, the equivalent. We think that the confession is good enough. It's correct and it's good, right? But it's not the whole total picture of what a Messiah does for our life. And so a question, again, Jesus could ask us is, I know that I am the Messiah to you, Jared. But what does that mean for your life? And we can proclaim that he is the Christ, but we are only partially able to see. We can believe in Jesus, and yet we still have the desires for what we want over what he wants. We can decide what we want, and we tell Jesus, hey, that's what I want, and I'm asking you to bless it. Or we choose a job, or we choose a marriage, or we choose a relationship, or a house, or a career, and then we just tell God to bless it. Or because I believe in you, you will absolutely bless this, without us ever asking him, is this what you want for my life, Jesus? It's essentially we're like, you're the Messiah. Now what do I get? I confessed it. Now shouldn't I I don't know, get some blessings or something? Or am I free from darkness? And is it like an insurance company? Can I put in a claim if something happens? And can I, what's the turnaround on that? I should be getting some blessings now, right? Or the equivalent would be, you're gonna overthrow Rome, right? Because we can confess Jesus is Lord, but not understand what that means for our life. And I see this in a lot of people like Shia LaBeouf or Jordan Peterson, and they have confessed, yes, I believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but they don't completely understand what that means for their life. And some has changed, but not a lot has changed. And when the world presses in upon them, you're starting to see them come unraveled. The confession, man, that's great that you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but what does that mean for your life, Jordan Peterson? What does that mean? We don't see the total picture. We need a second touch, a second sight to see it clearer. Because Peter, he didn't know that he was being used as a tool by Satan. And often we don't either. We don't understand, but Jesus correctly rebukes Peter here and tells him why his thinking was satanic, not that Peter was satanic. Because Peter was rejecting God by embracing Satan's ideals, and Satan took advantage of that because he wanted what men wanted, or the desires of men instead of the things of God. Satan took advantage of him, and that's a big warning for us. Man, if Jesus is gonna say, get behind me, Satan, for putting the desires of men over the desires of God, and that's satanic thinking, I'm in trouble. I've been used by a tool by Satan too many times, and I'm gonna guess I'm not the only person in this room. So notice that it says, this is what's very interesting to me. It says that they were walking along when this moment happened. So they're walking along, the disciples and Jesus. And then it says, that he tells Peter, get behind me, Satan. But many believe that as they were walking as a group, Peter was walking ahead of Jesus. Because Peter didn't have a lot of self-awareness. And Peter probably was just was just listening, and he's out in front of Jesus. He hears Jesus saying, here's what the Messiah has to do. Here's what I gotta do. And suddenly Peter turns back, is how I envision it, back to Jesus, and they're probably walking, and he's turning, he's kind of got the disciples over here, and he's like, listen, Jesus, I gotta tell you something. Now here's what a Messiah does. And then notice that it says Jesus, he doesn't address Peter first. He turns around and turns his back on him, addresses the disciples, and then addresses Peter and says, get behind me, Satan. He stops the whole group, stop. And he turns around, says, get behind me, Satan. Because what this means is that Peter was walking ahead of Jesus, and now he has come back to tell him, to correct him. Jesus turns around, turns his back on that thinking, and says, you don't lead me. You do not lead me. He's saying, get behind me, Satan. Peter, fall in line. He's saying, like, you do not get to walk ahead of me. You follow me. And he knew when, no, you are coming trying to correct me, Peter. I do not serve you. And you have let Satan lead you to this thinking. And I will turn my back on that every time. And so sometimes I see this as a parallel for us, that sometimes we like to try to get our desires and see our desires and of ourselves, for ourselves, and read them into God's word. We can try to get our desires to fit what the Bible says, and we can't. So we try to figure out a way to change it, or we find some backstory that is untrue that we heard on Instagram. And so we're like, oh, well, there we go. That's how I can get scripture to say what I need it to say. And so the equivalent of this is we can try to now correct Jesus and pull him aside and say, Jesus, actually, did you know what your word actually says? It says this, and good thing I'm here. And so we try to tell Jesus, like, no, my desires, they better suit that. And I'm gonna pull you aside, and I'm gonna do it right in front of everybody. And when we do this, and if we do this, we should expect a spiritual rebuke from Jesus. Because but the thing of it is, if we are truly walking with Jesus, if you are truly a follower of Jesus, you will accept that rebuke gladly. Because like Peter had a good heart. Like Peter truly genuinely wanted the best. He wanted to follow Jesus. He was just very heavy-handed. He needed a lot more discipline. So when Jesus rebukes you, you should be like, I'm sorry. Like, thank you. I want to get it right. That's all I want. Like, because none of us are going to get everything right. Like, I'm not gonna get everything right. And so like, if I'm gonna be rebuked by Jesus, I'm gonna go, fair, like, then show me. Because conviction is good, it's a good thing. It keeps us away from the edge. It pulls us away from our sin. It pulls us closer to Jesus. Conviction and rebuke by Jesus is good. It means he loves us. Let me show you that in scripture. In Hebrews 12, it says, and have you forgotten the encouraging words God spoke to you as his children? He said, my child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline, and don't give up when he corrects you. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes each one he accepts as his child. As you endure this divine discipline, remember that God is treating you as his own children. Who ever heard of a child who was never disciplined by its father? Say, have you been to Walmart? Anyway, that's my own, sorry, I repent. But you see, Jesus, he had to suffer and he had to die for them to truly see that he was the Messiah. That was the second picture. So for them, they had to wait a little bit longer to understand what that all meant. He has died, he has risen, we can see it. We don't need it. We've got the second picture very much clearly. We say, yes, Jesus says, yes, I am the Messiah, but what does that mean for your life? And we know that the clearer picture clearly wasn't to be placing self above Jesus like Peter tried. So what does the second sight and the healing touch of Jesus bring for our lives? Well, that is in number 3, which is eternal sight. So let's finish this part up. It says, then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, for my sake, and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Jesus went on to say, I tell you the truth, some standing here right now will not die before they see the kingdom of God arrive in great power. So understand that taking up the cross, like this is another phrase that they're like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, this is a wild and weird imagery for you to be giving us, Jesus. And again, we know the story. We have grown up with it for generations. We know what taking up a cross means because Jesus modeled it. But the concept of the cross, the concept of the cross is everywhere for us. It's in decorations. It's in jewelry. It's on shirts, and it's everywhere for us. But the crucifixion was something that was brutal. It was to be feared. It was a murder weapon towards people of you beware, you will get this. It was so bad, like being crucified on the cross was the worst way to die. It was supposed to instill terror into you, instill into every single person. The Romans loved to crucify people. There's even a story of someone being crucified on top of other people and to other people. And so this wouldn't make any sense to the disciples until after Jesus died. But in this moment, they're like, wait a minute. Take up a cross, the very thing that we are threatened with, the very worst. I don't understand what you're talking about. That doesn't make any sense to me. That is a horrible death. Why would I do that? But the disciples, they are given this second sight, and it's one of eternal sight. He was prepping them for that. He was saying, fix your eyes on what is eternal. Fix your eyes upon me. And you should be, to keep me in sight. And Jesus, he lays out what is required to save your life. He says you need to deny yourself. You need to take all of the things of the world and you need to put them down. And you need to take up your cross. You put it on your shoulder. You look straight ahead and you follow me. You put down your life, you lose your life. You put down the adulterous, sinful life that you have been living like everybody else does. You do not be ashamed of me and you will save your life. And that seems like a lot to be asking when you list it like that. But there is a cost to following Jesus that we all have to accept if you want to be his disciple. And David Garland, he said, the disciples cannot know who Jesus really is without accepting the necessity of his suffering and death. And they cannot be his disciples unless they accept that fate for themselves. And so if you want to follow Jesus, you have to accept what we may be asked to give up. Now, it may not be like the disciples. It may not be your life that you have to give up. Maybe it is, I don't know. But there is a cost that if you want to be his disciple, you must incur. You have to accept that the longings of your heart may not be the longings of the Father. You have to accept that you may have to sacrifice something. If not immediately, then eventually. And that's why a lot of people walk away from Jesus. Like, oh, you're asking way too much of me. No, I can't give that up. I won't give that up. There's too much pain in that. I'm not following you. I'll just go do my own thing. Or maybe they love self more than they love God. Because the desires of men above the desires of God, they love that because the desires of men are so much easier and they're instantly gratifying. Like the desires of God, they take time and they take discipline and ain't nobody got time for that, right? But it's like eating healthy food. Like you eat healthy food versus McDonald's. Like eating healthy food, it's more expensive. It takes longer, you have to be disciplined, but you are becoming stronger over time by eating healthy food. Whereas McDonald's is just easier, way easier. It tastes way better, but it is slowly killing you over time, right? It's making you weaker and you don't see it right away. But the irony here is that Jesus, he provides them. He says, if you want to gain your life, you have to lose it. You have to lose it. And they're like, stop saying weird things for a second, man. Like, I don't understand these things you're saying to me. He's saying you have to deny yourself. You have to forsake your earthly life for your heavenly life. You have to forego the things that you think that you're owed in this life and you'll never receive if I ask you to lay them down. And that's hard in a world that says you need to acquire more things. You need to have more fame. You need to get more views. You need to have a greater following. You need to have greater wealth. You need to build more bomb shelters. You need to start a coup. You need to overthrow the government. But know that the inside of all of this, it sounds like it's very easy. Pick up your cross and go and just block out the noise. But you know, and I know, we have opposition that comes for us in the enemy. And he comes and he tells you, put the cross down. You don't actually need to carry it. why are you doing things that it's so much more work? Why would you do that? The enemy tells us, pursue yourself. Pursue yourself, worship yourself. Like, why would you do this? Look at everybody else. They're not doing this. Why would you do this? He says, submit to yourself, look out for yourself, and I will give you the whole world. And this is what he told Jesus too. You can have everything if you want. And I love what Dennis Kinlaw said. He said, Satan disguises submission to himself under the ruse of personal autonomy. He never asked us to become his servants. Never once did the serpent say to Eve, I want to be your master. The shift in commitment is never from Christ to evil. It is always from Christ to self. And instead of his will, self-interest now rules, and what I want reigns, and that is the essence of sin. Because Jesus says to us, Jesus says, build my kingdom, not yours. Jesus says, serve my kingdom and you can share in it. Jesus says, serve your kingdom and you will die from it. Because you may have dreams in this life that he may ask you to put down and to follow him. You may have a career that you have to give up, that you love, that you have to put down if you want to follow him. You may have a dream of having a family, dream of having kids that you have to put down to follow him. You may have health that you have to give up and put down to follow him. You may have a desire to have more fame and to have more success and to experience these things in the world that you long to do, but Jesus may tell you, you will never have them. If you want to follow me, you have to forsake it. You will not experience these things in this lifetime, and it won't feel fair, but if you want to follow me, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me into eternity. Forsake what is temporary for what is eternal. Keep your eyes on me, not on yourself. So what does it mean to deny yourself? Warren Wiersbe, he said, denying self is not the same as self-denial. We practice self-denial when, for a good purpose, we occasionally give up things or activities. But we deny self when we surrender ourselves to Christ and determine to obey his will. So how do we deny ourselves? We deny ourselves by living a life that is an others-centered life. That is a God-centered life. Jesus said, love God and love others. So when you have a God-centered life and an others-centered life, other people will have an others-centered life to take care of you, and you both will point at God as an others-centered people. That's how his church is aligned. But oftentimes we need this eternal sight given to us for Jesus to wipe that spiritual gunk out of our eyes, to give us that extra healing, that touch, so that we're not seeing just trees walking around. We see the kingdom of God very, very clearly. But once you know Jesus, once you follow Jesus, it doesn't make life easier, does it? No. Sometimes it's more difficult, but I will say that following Jesus makes navigating trials and suffering much easier. Because everybody else in the world, they will try to go and solve it through all these different things or just move on to the next thing, to buy the next thing, be with the next person. And yet they try to just cover up this wound that is inside of their hearts. But us as believers, he makes it easier to navigate through the trials and through the suffering. And just when you think that the world is coming at you and the enemy is coming at you and he's pushing you off course, you put the cross on your shoulder and you let it anchor you down. While everybody else is getting taken apart, and while everybody else is getting, the enemy is coming and he's devouring, and the storms of life are throwing and tossing people, you have the cross on your back as you look ahead to salvation. And yeah, it is hard. And yeah, it is hard to hold the cross. There is an extra weight to it. And yeah, the storms of life, they come and they hit you and they try to knock you off, and it is hard, but the weight of the cross weighs you down and it will not pull you up. And yeah, the sufferings of life are hard, but the weight of the cross, it pulls you down. It will anchors you down to the ground so that you can continue to take the next step and to continue to take the next step. And here's how I picture it. I see that a lot of times in this visual, like you are walking through this valley, through this ravine, and there is just dark clouds all around, and you have to go through this winding path, and there is a storm coming, but you see your salvation, you see the light up ahead, and you have your cross on your back, and all you can do is just one step at a time, and you see people going left and right, and they're getting thrown everywhere as life is taking them, and you just keep continuing and letting it weight you down, and you take the next step, and just when you think that you're alone, you look to your left and you look to your right, and you realize there are others who have their crosses, and they're just taking the next step. That's all you can do. And if you pan out and you look in this whole big storm as we are walking towards Jesus, all you see is a sea of people holding crosses, just slowly. It's like our whole church is just slowly has a cross on their back, just walking towards Jesus. And you see the sea of people as we wait for him to take us home, as we march our way there. So Jesus gives us sight for our blindness gradually through a second touch. He lets us see the whole picture. But how blind are you? How blind are you truly? Like, can you only see part of the picture? Do you need a second touch? Is he just the Messiah to you? But what does that mean for your life? And some people are gonna go, I get it, I have to pick up a cross now, but I'm not gonna do it. Because that is like my whole childhood growing up, watching people say, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, and then watching them go out and do the opposite. And like as a kid, you just think that's what being a Christian is. You just do the opposite. You just say the thing and you get freed to go do whatever you want. You have a license to sin, apparently. But taking up a cross is not just getting rid of some activities for a good purpose. It is laying down your life. And that's why there's not gonna be very many people. And that's why Jesus says the wide road is wide, the path is wide to the gateway to hell. Because it's easy to find and it will tell you whatever you want to hear. You can go even create your own trail if you want, but the narrow path is hard. The narrow path is for the people who find it. You can see the light of salvation, and it is not always easier, but it will save your soul. So do people look like trees walking around to you? Is he just the Messiah to you? But what does that mean for your life? Have you picked up your cross yet? So David Garland, he said, the cross is the heart of the gospel, and bearing a cross is the central requirement of discipleship. Making the confession that Jesus is the Christ is not enough. If he is the Christ, then he expects to be followed and obeyed. He does not ask for modest adjustments in our life, but a complete overhaul of our behavior. He calls us to bear a cross. Jesus does not want a convoy of followers who marvel at his deeds, but fail to follow his example. Because Jesus doesn't say, hey, pick up your cross, take up your cross. It's just a good suggestion. No, he modeled it. He took that cross and he was foreshadowing. So I can imagine the disciples are watching Jesus going to the cross, and suddenly they're like, I get it. I get it. And they're watching him take the cross and they're thinking, can I do that? Can I do that? And that's a lot of us. Jesus comes and he convicts you and the first reaction is, well, no, that's too emotional. That's too emotional. No. I'm good with my life. But Jesus comes right at your sin. He comes right at the things he wants you to change, and he says, put it down and pick up your cross. And a lot of people will say, I'm good. I'm good. But I want us to be disciples of Jesus. And I can stand up here and I can plead with you. I can yell all I want. But it doesn't matter if you don't make the change. I can only try to lead you to Jesus, but it's up to you to pick up the cross. So let's be disciples that take up our crosses instead of crossing off Jesus on our to-do list today.